PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. Here's my take on Game 3 of the World Chess Championship match between Gukesh, Dommaraju and Ding Liren. So going into this third game, of course, Ding led 1.5-half. Game 2 was quite placid. So what would happen in this one? Well, placid it was not. So Gukesh changes his first move and goes for 1d4. And we've got a pretty standard Queen's Gambit declined. At this moment, white can choose between g3 or knight c3 or bishop g5. But Gukesh went for the exchange variation of the Queen's Gambit, which can lead to quite positional manoeuvring when the pawn structure is fixed in this way. But in this game, it was all tactical. So the first slight surprise, Queen c2. You can instead play the bishop to g5 or f4. But what's the point of Queen c2? Well, it's about claiming control over this diagonal. So this stops Black's bishop from emerging on f5. And Black has various moves here, but Ding decided to fight for control of this diagonal by playing g6. And the idea is not particularly to put the bishop to g7, but to play that bishop to f5 on an excellent diagonal and gaining time by hitting the queen. And then h3 from Gukesh. Once again, I should say, be very careful about playing these little pawn moves at the side of the board. I wouldn't recommend this to players who are just starting out the game. But the idea is, again, it's all about fighting for control of this square to advance with g4. So this is a very bold strategy. So Ding continues with bishop f5, the intention of g6, guarding the bishop, hits the queen, which came out to b3, attacking the pawn on b7, and Ding prevented this with queen b6. So looks very much like we're going to get a queen exchange, but who's going to be doing the exchanging? I think Black would very much like this exchange to take place because that's a nice clump of pawns. This b pawn could advance, and you can see Black might be able to use that semi-open a file for the rook. But Gukesh continues with his strategy of advancing g4. So this is very bold. And at this moment, Ding thought for almost 15 minutes. His first big think of the game. Now you could just duck back with bishop e6. I think that's a safe way of playing. But Ding was up for the challenge and he exchanged queens and put the bishop on c2. Again, you don't have to do that. You could just duck back with bishop e6. But Ding wants to go for it. So he's threatening that pawn on b3. So this is a highly complex position. It's getting very, very tactical because you can see that that bishop is, way in advance of the rest of Black's army. Now, I think a very poor move here would be for White to retreat that knight to defend here. Because then it just bottles in that bishop, and then knight a6 coming to b4. I think that would be very nice for Black. But bishop f4 from Gukesh. That bishop wants to come outside the pawn chain. And this is a really tricky position. So Black has to be very careful with that bishop. If, for example, bishop takes b3, this is certainly promising for White after this one. And if bishop here, then e3. White is going to win this pawn back, because after b5 is a clear mistake because of knight takes. Nice trick, bishop g2. That reminds me of a very old trap against the Queen's Gambit accepted. I'll show you that another time. In fact, I've surely shown it on the channel. So black has to be very, very careful with this bishop. So that's why Ding played h5 after not too much reflection. So he wants to provoke this pawn to advance. So for example, g5, and now that bishop would have an escape square, and that's going to be fine for black. But Gukesh was alert to this possibility and played rook g1 very quickly. So that's just making sure that this pawn is protected and it still covers the f5 square. So an exchange on g4 from Ding, and that potentially gives black some possibilities on the open h file. So Ding at this moment thought for 33.5 minutes. The players had been following a previous game, Kramnik against Erigaisi from 2023, where Erigaisi, another Indian star, took on b3, and this was a mistake because after this and bishop c4, again, it's possible for white to pick up that pawn, and with the two bishops and this very nice central structure, white is better. And Gukesh said that he was aware of this game. Ding clearly wasn't. And he thought for 33 minutes, but he didn't take that pawn. He played knight d7, and that's a much better move, keeping black's options open. So this bishop still might take here if it's pushed. It might retreat here. We don't know yet. Knight d2. And now there is a threat to trap that bishop, because after rook c1, the bishop will have to come here, and then f3, and it hasn't got a good square to go to. So that's why here Ding played rook g8. So he wants to play g5, attacking the bishop, and then this bishop can come all the way back. So that's why g5 was played, stopping g5. The knight came to h5 to attack the bishop, which dropped back to h2. But at least the bishop can now come back to f5. And it's quite funny. Ding now put the rook back on h8. So its job is done. It's provoked g5, and now it returns to the open file. But still very unclear. f3. So that covers the e4 square, and the pawn might well advance to e4. Knight g7. Rook attacks the bishop, which moved to g3. In this position, black's best move is bishop e7. I'll return to that in a second, but I want to show you what happened in the game. In the game, rook h5 was played, and this was a mistake. Gukesh played e5. Excuse me, e4. I'm getting mixed up. This is it's a really complex position. e4, and that was taken. Now, if rook takes pawn, then rook c1, you can see that bishop is trapped. So Ding played knight e6. He'd obviously calculated this and thought that after rook c1, knight takes d4, he was going to be better. This is what happened in the game. Bishop f2 hits the knight, which supports the bishop. And so Ding played bishop g7. Now, presumably he'd seen that after bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, attacks this rook, rook g2. Yes, the bishop is trapped, but after bishop takes, knight takes, bishop e3, attacking this one, bishop g5, black has 3 pawns for the piece. So that's a rough material balance. I'm sure that's what Ding had calculated. But I'd like you to have a think in this position. So this is the actual game position after 22 moves. So here I'd like you to have a think. What did Gukesh play instead of taking the knight? So white to play. What excellent move had Gukesh prepared, and what did he play here? You have a think, I'll have a drink. Cheers. Are you ready? Gukesh had foreseen that knight e2 wins material. I mean, it looks like a funny move, this knight retreat. And, you know, all white's pieces are sort of on the first and second ranks. But it's incredibly powerful. And clearly this is what Ding had missed when he went in for this whole variation. So first things first, that knight is attacked by 2 pieces and only defended by 1. So knight takes or bishop takes threatened. And if knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, 2 threats. The rook and also the bishop. In fact, that bishop is still trapped. So white is winning material. So Ding, the best that Ding could do was to take on b3. Rook takes bishop. Knight takes and king takes. So Gukesh had won a piece and black has only 2 pawns for it. I'm going to go back at this moment. Well, tell you what, I'll do that at the end of the game. As we're well into the game continuation. So knight e5. Well, let's take stock. So what does black have for the piece? White has an extra bishop. Well, black has 2 pawns, a compact position, there are no real weaknesses, and a strong knight in the middle of the board. But it's all very static. It's not really possible for black to improve the position. You know, there was this old rule in weekend tournament chess in England when I was growing up. To get good compensation for a piece, you needed 2 pawns and a check. Here, well, it's just not really happening. The queens are off the board and white's position isn't really in any danger. The king isn't in too much danger. Knight d4, played by Gukesh, covering the check here. Rook d8, okay, there's a pin, but the king just steps out, so nice maneuver there. Ding can't do much. Rook h2, bishop g2, just covers, and you can see that Gukesh is just kind of straightening out his pieces. And there are no tactics here for Ding. a6, that's an indication that black really can't do much. He's just making sure that this pawn, everything is protected, but there's no pawn break, there's nothing really doing for black. b3, a very careful move, covering this square in case this rook should move. Rook d7, again, that's indicative of the fact that black really can't do anything. Ding is just waiting here. Rook c1, very calm, very careful, just connecting the rooks because he might at some moment want to play rook h1. There's no rush here. You know, as black isn't really doing anything, then there's really no harm in just keeping things absolutely steady. So in this position, if knight g4, well, that's easy to cover. The knight can just come back and hit that rook. There's actually no danger at all. So king e7 played by Ding. Okay, it's slight improvement with the position, but again, no real threat. So rook d1, just protecting this one, making sure everything is covered. Notice with b3, then knight c4 simply isn't available. King e8, Ding is just marking time. Bishop g3, and now, little by little, so very careful moves, Gukesh is forcing that rook back. Threat to this one, but Gukesh had it all worked out. Knight f3. I should mention by this time Ding was really short of time, just to add to his woes. And I mean, it's a tough position. You're worse. You can't really do anything. And yeah, running short of time. Ding had less than a minute for 7 moves. And he took on f3. I mean, the most tenacious is to exchange rooks and bring the knight back. But, you know, ultimately, I think black his defences will just be cracked in this position. Little by little, white will creep forward. But Ding took here. Now, not bishop takes because rook takes. That's still not so clear. But king takes, played quickly by Gukesh, is an excellent move. And here is the point. If black tries to win this pawn, rook takes, rook g5, bishop h4, hits the rook. If the rook moves, then rook d8 is mate. So all the tactics work for white here. Or rook takes g5, an exchange of rooks, rook check, bishop h3. Notice the king is caught in this deadly crossfire. And if f5, then takes, and king f4 hits the rook, and then bishop takes pawn check. It's over. So that's why Ding played bishop d4, but rook h1, creeping in. I mean, the best is to exchange rooks, but this is miserable. It really is. I mean, ultimately, black will not survive this position with these 2 beautiful bishops. But Ding played rook takes pawn, but this loses instantly, loses more material because of bishop h3. Hits the rook has to keep hold of this bishop. If rook d8, then that's a deadly skewer. So Ding played f5. I mean, he had seconds on the clock here, but I mean, that was irrelevant because white is winning material. Bishop f5. And at this point, bishop f4 hitting the rook. At this point, Ding played rook h5, leaned across to press the clock, but in fact, his clock had already gone to 0, and so he lost on time. So officially, actually, this move shouldn't stand. This should be the final position officially. In any case, after rook h5, Gukesh would have played bishop takes pawn. So hits this rook. If pawn takes bishop, of course, rook takes rook. White is a rook up. And if rook takes rook, bishop takes rook check. And rook takes rook again. White is a rook up. So yeah, bishop f5, bishop takes f5 would have been completely over. I mean, just irrespective of Ding losing on time. Well, that was an utterly convincing game. Let me just take you back to one position. So back here, rook h5 was a mistake. And clearly Ding's calculation let him down. You know, there were very forcing continuations after e4. But basically, this bishop is in trouble. So what's the move? In fact, bishop e7, as I mentioned, is a good move. And Gukesh said he'd underestimated that. So the point is this. So this one is attacked. If rook c1, the bishop comes back to f5. e4, bishop e6. But this is a bit problematic for white, actually. So if pawn takes pawn, I mean, Ding went through this variation afterwards. I mean, he looked at bishop takes pawn, which is good. Pawn takes pawn is also fine. It's tricky defending this pawn. So even if white goes for, let's say, knight b5, then king f8, positionally black is better here. Because of the threat here, because of the control of this file. I mean, white certainly doesn't want to play a move like f4. It's about control of this square, actually. It looks very nice for black. But after that excellent piece of calculation by Gukesh, rook h5, e4, that bishop is in massive trouble. And having won the piece, so let's get to this position. I think Gukesh's technique was excellent. He didn't rush it. He just sorted his pieces out very carefully. And at the end, yeah, he just crushed it. Calculated everything perfectly. So that was a disappointing game from Ding. And yeah, he got out-calculated by Gukesh. So, score in the match, 1.5 all. Thursday is a rest day. Game 4 is Friday. Can Ding come back? How will he cope with this new situation? We're back to even scores, 1.5 all. See you Friday. See you for Game 4.